Psalm 91. I'm really, it's, I was going to say it's funny. It's not really funny, but uh, it's at least, it's a little fascinating to me that uh, there are a lot of times when I start working through a psalm and I go, wow, this is becoming one of my favorite passages in the Bible. And Psalm 91 fits in that category. Actually, I'm going to repeat this again. That verse 2 is it's just a world-class morning prayer. It'd be great any time of the day, but to me, it's the morning, and this is not so much a prayer asking God for anything. It's a prayer of uh, confession and declaration. And it's not like God isn't having gone, oh, you need to say something more about me. That's not it. But as I pray it, I'm reminding myself, this I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge and place of safety. He is my God, and I trust him. So a lot of things that happen in my day, normally, that threaten to disrupt my security, my peace of mind. That's the way the world is. Frankly, the world is an ugly and, on a lot of levels, unsafe place. Now, I don't think it ever gets unsafe for me in the same way that it did for the author of this psalm on a physical level, but it's increasingly becoming more and more physically unsafe. And I think part of the reason it feels that way to me is because all of this flood of information and videos and commentary are so in my face and accessible that if it feels like this is becoming a less safe place. Well, it might be. I do know this. Ever since Adam took the fruit from Eve and bit a mouthful of it, we have been cursed. The system that God put in place has been broken. And now the world is not a safe place. Okay, keep going, Steve. And then he says, for he will rescue you from every trap, in verse 3, and protect you from deadly disease. We talked about that last time. He will cover you with his feathers, and he will shelter you with his wings. This is a word picture for the promise of God's presence. You see, it's impossible for him to cover us with his wings and shelter us with his feathers, or actually, it's cover us with his feathers and shelter us with his wings, and not be present. This is a thing that can only happen because he is present. His faithful promises are your armor and protection, and that's where I want to kind of camp out a little bit today. Somebody, I'm sure, has done the research to have a number, a definitive number of the times in the Bible where God makes a promise. How many promises are in the Bible, I guess, would be my, Siri, how many promises are in the Bible? I haven't stopped to look at that. And part of the reason is because actually that number doesn't interest me. And here's why. Because not all of the promises that God made and we have recorded in our Bible were made for you and me. Not all of his promises are universal. The vast majority of his promises were made to specific individuals at a specific time and a specific place for a specific reason. Now, I know this is going to go against the grain of a lot of things that you hear, and I'm not going to apologize for that, because I think we need to take a realistic and bold look at God's promises. I do believe that when God makes a promise, he fulfills it. Don't mistake that. I wouldn't, I just won't. It is my desire to never dispute that or doubt it. God is a promise keeper. Back in the 1990s, the Promise Keeper movement exploded, and it was a good thing. I'm grateful. There was a generation of men who were raised with emotionally absent and physically absent dads, and they didn't have a model for what a dad is and does. And the Promise Keepers movement started on the premise that when men are godly men, families are healed. And in fact, the country can be healed. There was racial reconciliation. There was the fidelity in marriage. There were 7 promises of a promise keeper, and they were biblical promises. I think where it fell apart, there's a whole gob of reasons for why the Promise Keeper movement basically imploded. But one of the reasons was because many, I won't say most, but many of the guys that came to a Promise Keepers rally were promise makers, but not promise keepers. They'd get so fired up at the stadium event, and they'd hear fabulous, challenging, biblical messages from men of integrity, and get so, inspired and cranked. And then they would go home and kind of, with every passing day, the fervor was reduced. The fire kind of dwindled until, that was a great experience, but it didn't change. Their life didn't change. And sometimes I've heard guys say, well, it was a life-changing event. Really? I'm not seeing any change. Okay, it's easy for me to get on that, critical side. I don't want to be critical. What I want to say is, God is not just a promise maker. He is a promise maker and a promise keeper. If he promises it, you can take it to the bank. Now, one of the issues with God's promises is that we are given the privilege and responsibility of discerning what promises were made for all of us, for all people, in all places, at all times, and what promises were made for one person or one group of people for a particular place and time. I'm going to pick on one. I see it on my Facebook page. I see it like, there are plaques and posters, and I see people saying, this is my life verse. Well, okay. For I know the plans I have for you, you know the rest, for good. Now, this is true. God has plans for us that are good. But I think you kind of need to go back and read the book of Jeremiah, where this comes from, and look at it and realize this was a promise made to Israel, broken Israel, Israel in full-on retreat, in captivity, as though God was saying to them, I have plans for you, not to harm you, but for your good. And I want you to bear that in mind as you're going through this period of, and it turns out it was 70 years of captivity in Babylon. So, was that a promise to you as well? Okay, this is where it gets a little tricky. I think tricky. Yes and no. I think we can, from the rest of Scripture, we can know God's plans for us are good. I mean, Romans 8:28. For we know that in all things God is at work for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So yes, his plan is for good. But that specific promise was made to a specific group of people at a specific time. So I'm not saying, I'll get rid of that poster, get that idea out of your head. No, I'm just saying, okay, that's a case where that promise, and it's a powerful promise, should be applied to us in reflection as we look at God's grand purpose, but we have to keep it in its context. There's a whole lot of things that when they're taken out of context, they become not just less powerful, but if you take certain things out of context, they become destructive. Now, how do you know if a promise is for you? Well, there are some promises that simply say this is a promise for everyone. For you and your children and your children's children, okay? There are other promises that are, I mean, they're how would I say this? They carry God's heart, but they're specifically to certain people. Another one that I think gets, I read it and occasionally hear it, the idea that no weapon that is fashioned will stand against you. Now, okay, was that for everybody? Well, frankly, no, it was not. It was for Israel, under attack, under siege. I cannot say none of those evil things will prevail against me. Now, I can say in the big picture, on the long term, in the sense of eternity, Jesus wins. So anything that is an attack directed at me, there will be a winner, Jesus, and a loser, Satan. But I don't necessarily think I can say no weapon that's, I can't even remember the exact wording now. No weapon, blah, blah, no weapon that is fashioned will stand against. Not seeing it, to be honest. I'm not seeing that happen. Except I have this confidence that in the long term, as we step back and look at God's grandest plan, our grandest view of God's grand plan, any weapon that's formed against him will fail because he wins. Always, every time, but not always in the timing that makes sense to me or you. So here's my challenge. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. On your own, however you want to do this, there's a lot of different ways to try it, including just get on your web browser and say all of God's promises and see what you get. But realize you've got to evaluate, are those promises for us Or was that a promise for specific people at a specific time? And here's the other part of that. The only reason for going through these promises is so that you've got an armor of protection in the form of God's promises. Well, I went well past what I thought I was going to do, so I'm going to shut up. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.